Hello. Although it happened many years ago, people worldwide are still fascinated by the Second World War. Personal stories and deeds of valour still persist in print, radio and television today. But one of the strangest accounts I've heard is set in the world of handlebar moustaches, daredevil flying and aerial combat. It involves a Lancaster bomber and a little-known hero named Tom Leak. Tom, a navigator and bomb aimer, claims he was awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross for saying his prayers. His crew was part of a famous Pathfinder group under the leadership of Group Captain Cheshire, and we'll be unravelling Tom's story right after our first song.
Walking down this dusty road, feeling kind of new. You ever thought I'm thinking, Lord, my thoughts of you? Wondering how it's gonna feel when I see you face to face, and knowing while I'm lingering here, I've got a close place. I found a close place next to you, and under the arms of love my spirit renewed. And even in stormy weather and in the struggles in this race, I just run beside you, my cares fly away. I found a close place. Needing a friend to talk to help me along, praying for inspiration while I'm humming a song, enjoying my new life, and I'm picking up my pace, thanking God for a reason to live. I found a close place. I found a close place next to you. Under the arms of love, my spirit renewed. And even in stormy weather and in the struggles in this race, I just run beside you, my cares fly away. I found a close place. I found a close place next to you. Under the arms of love, my spirit renewed. And even in stormy weather and in the struggles in this race, I just run beside you, my cares fly away. I found a close place.
Tom, welcome to the programme. Now, I think cricket-loving fans might be particularly interested in your wartime service because, strangely, it all started and finished in the hallowed pavilion at Lord's Cricket Ground, didn't it?
Yes, that's right. It seems rather strange having to report to a cricket ground to learn how to fly, but it was the reception centre for aircrew at that time. And actually, you've heard of the sacred long room at Lord's. We actually had a medical in that room, and I noticed there's a long sideboard and no end of exhibits, cricket balls mounted that had some special history attached to them. And one thing, there was a large case, glass case, with a cricket bat in, and it was the one that Sir Len Hutton used when he made a test record of 367 runs. We were there just for 4 weeks, and we learned Morse code, did a little bit of drill on the cricket ground.
So whilst you were having your jabs, you know, your fainting jabs,
yes.
You were falling down under Len Hutton's
under Len Hutton's bat, yes.
And then, of course, at the end of the war, you went back to Lord's, didn't you?
Yes, that was rather remarkable. I never saw Lord's again until 1945, and the war was over, and I was in London at the time, and there was a victory test match between Australia and England. And when I got to the ground, my hopes were dashed. There were so many there, they'd closed the gates, and there were long crocodiles of queues, and just seemed hopeless. But someone in the crowds saw me with my uniform on and said, "Oh, they'll let you in if you go to the gate." So I walked up to the gate, and the gatekeeper let me in. I started to walk along, and he said, "Hey, you've got to pay." I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
So I paid and went, and there was a very large crowd there. And I just stood getting my bearings, and I noticed next to me was a military man. When I looked again, I was surprised. There he was with a black beret and far more medals than I had, and it was General Montgomery.
Oh, wow.
And you may know that he was a good Christian soldier, and however busy he was during the war, he insisted that he had his Bible reading and prayer every morning.
Now, when you joined the RAF, the full horrors of warfare hadn't yet unfolded. Did the young aircrew tend to see everything in sporty terms? You know, we're going in to bat against Hitler's 11?
Yes, there was a rather light-hearted attitude. I mean, look at the war songs that were sung about chasing Hitler and one thing or another. And aircrew, there was something exciting, you know, the spirit of adventure. Leaving home, meeting new friends, going on leave occasionally, going to fresh places. For instance, we had 16 weeks at Torquay on a navigation course, and then in the magazines and the newspapers at that time there were cartoons joking about the war. But of course, when it came to the crunch, the serious side on operations, they were more serious. But even then, they just took the Epicurean attitude, let us eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Didn't seem to worry about tomorrow. They often, if they weren't flying, they would go out and with a few friends and get merry. Sometimes in the mess they would get quite tipsy. I remember going to Coningsby and the officers' mess there, and the ceiling is extremely high, at least 20 feet or more, and right in the centre of the ceiling was the imprint of a bare foot in black ink. And I'm amazed at how it got there. I didn't actually witness it myself, but I was told that previously, on one of these moments, somewhere about midnight, some of the aircrew were a little bit merry, and they got the tables together, chairs on top, and gradually made a sort of pylon. And then one chap braved and climbed to the top, removed his shoe and left his imprint. Now, anybody else would have been court-martialed for bringing the service into disrepute, but aircrew could get away with it.
Yes, now, leaving home must have been a wrench for you. You know, you'd led a sheltered life, you'd been in the church choir and connected with church for a number of years, and then you're thrown in amongst all these red-blooded men at the balloon squadron. How did you feel about that?
Yes, well, the headquarters of the barrage balloon was at Cardington, near Bedford. And that was chosen because there's a very large hangar there that used to house the R-101 airship. And therefore they were able to drive the balloons in on winches and, into the hangar. Well, I reported there for initial training, and to begin with, 100 of us queued up for vaccination and inoculation jabs. Well, there were about 100 of us. Well, 3 of them fainted. So I thought, well, they're not very brave. But anyway, the first night I thought, well, we were in the barrack room, there would be about 30 of us. And I felt that I'd got to let them know that I was a Christian. And that meant that when bedtime came, I was going to kneel down beside my bed and say my prayers. And so eventually, the whole hut was a hubbub of talk and that. And I, with my heart pounding, I knelt down beside my bed, and then I heard a lot of tittering and laughing, And then there was one man in particular that I distinctly disliked. Lived near King's Cross in London. Very foul-mouthed man. Well, I heard him shout, "Shut up!" And everything went quiet. And I continued, and nothing more was said. But the next morning, this particular chap came to me, and he says, "Do you go to church?" I said, "Yes." He says, "You read your Bible, do you?" I said, "Yes, I do." He says, "Oh, I wish I could be like you." I said, "Well, you can be, if you'll only trust in the Lord Jesus."
Now, the time came, Tom, when you left the barrage balloons and became a trainee bomb aimer under a Polish pilot. That was rather tricky, wasn't it?
It was also complicated because the Polish pilots that were refugees from their own country couldn't speak English, and one chap in particular was worse than others. And so, if we were directing the aircraft to the port, we'd say left, left. Steady if it was maintaining course, or right, right. Well, his idea was, you're laying on your tummy in the nose of the aircraft. He said, "If you want me to steer to the left, raise your left leg. If you want me to steer to the right, raise your right leg. If you want me to maintain steady, raise both legs." So it was like being in a circus, lying on your tummy with both legs in the air, and
Well, Tom, I don't know about leg movements, but I know that if I don't bring a song on very quickly now, there are going to be a lot of hand movements in the studio. So let's just have some music at this time, shall we?
There's a story about a man thrown into a den with hungry lions around him. Everybody thought this was the end, but an angel came from heaven when Daniel was in this clutch. He made sure with all these lions every mouth was shut. Never say never, 'cause everything is always possible with God. Never say never, 'cause everything is always possible with God. When they crucified the Savior, a crown of thorns was on his head, and they pierced him with a spear to make sure that he was dead. When he finally died, the people took him down. They put him in the tomb, but he rose up from the ground. Never say never, 'cause everything is always possible with God. Never say never, 'cause everything is always possible with God. Listen to me, people, when everything goes wrong and you feel you'll never make it, just sing this little song. There's nothing in this world, no matter how hard it is, that can destroy our faith in God, 'cause the King of Glory lives. So never say never, 'cause everything is always possible with God. Never say never, 'cause everything is always possible with God. Never say never, 'cause everything is always possible with God.
Well, that was a great song, Tom. Now, you finally got into real action as a navigator bomb aimer, and you went on your very first trip. Now, was that raid uneventful?
It was actually to Berlin, and seemed eventful. The first trip Berlin. Then I thought, well, supposing I don't come back, and I didn't feel so happy. But once we got in the air, we you settle down, training and routine, and I was working a radar set, and we got to the target, and when we left the target, we came back a slightly different way from our inward route. The whole journey, the whole trip took 6 hours, but on the way back, we had to pass close to the city of Hanover. We would actually miss it by 10 miles. But we thought we were pretty well on course when suddenly the pilot called to us and he said, "There's a group of searchlights ahead. Are you sure we're not heading for Hanover? Are we on course?" We said that as far as we knew, we were on course. Well, he said, "I'm not going over those lights." Well, actually, this is a trick of the enemy. They did it frequently. They put a group of searchlights in a field in the heart of the country, aircraft altered course, and of course went perhaps over a city. Well, being pathfinders, we were right in the forefront of the raid. We'd had to drop green target indicators over the target.
And these searchlights caught you eventually?
And yes, when we altered course, and the city, being in the forefront of the raid, they just let us come in, and everywhere was in darkness. And then we were over the centre of the city. Suddenly there was a blue light, a radar-worked searchlight, just pinned us. And then others that were worked manually came onto us, and we were coned in the searchlight. And actually, there's no way out of a modern searchlight cone. You just have to plough your way through it. And the pilot threw the aircraft about. Sometimes we dropped so steeply that it defeated the gravity. Some of our computers and things on the table and ruler were hovering in the air as the aircraft dropped suddenly.
And were there any other fighters in the air at the time?
Well, yes, there was actually a fighter. Our tail gunner saw a fighter coming in and was on his toes when suddenly it peeled over and went down. And he thinks that it was hit by shell fire from the guns. We were being plastered pretty well, and then suddenly a shell burst just above our aircraft. If it had burst underneath, it would have been fatal. But most of the explosive force went up, but some fragments came down through the roof of the aircraft. And I felt a burning sensation on my leg and on the back of my hand. And the radar set I was working and another one went out. They were hit. And then the starboard outer engine was on fire. And the pilot called to the engineer to use the extinguisher. So we put that out. And he was still struggling to get clear of the searchlights. Well, eventually we got clear.
And he managed to get home, did he?
Yes, he brought us safely back on.
That was your very first trip. What on earth did people say when you got back to the airfield about that?
Well, the rest of the squadron, some of them had done more flying than us.
Yes.
They'd witnessed it and avoided Hanover after that. And they were very impressed. They said, "Well, what you endured there, if your number had been up, you would have gone then." They said, "We're convinced that you'll survive the war."
Now, as the war progressed, a lot of planes never came back, and that must have caused quite a lot of consternation with pilots and aircrew and played on their nerves quite a bit.
Well, the tail gunner, we had one attack when the tail gunner was injured, and after that, he was a bundle of nerves, and he could see every shadow on the cloud was a fighter, and he was aiming his guns and that, and making us all in a state of tension. And so they had to withdraw him.
And I suppose a lot of aircrew were thinking about their families at home. You know,
yes,
things were going on domestically.
There was one case I heard of on our station. The chap's wife, he was a tail gunner, and his wife was expecting a baby, and I suppose he was under extra strain, and he just didn't want to go on the raid. So he sabotaged the oil pipes leading to the turret, and once they got airborne, he reported to the pilot that the turret was US. Well, on those occasions, we always had to boomerang, we always had to come back. And, of course, when the aircraft was examined the next day, they could see it was deliberate, and he was court-martialed.
Was there any particular time when the morale of the RAF crews reached an all-time low?
Oh, yes. That was our fourth trip. That was to Berlin, and that was called Black Thursday. And on this particular night, we came back from Berlin. There'd been no flying for 16 days, and they said, well, when you get back, the ceiling will be at 800 feet. It will be low, but it will be safe enough to land.
That's the cloud ceiling.
Yes, but they made a miscalculation. And when we got back, the ceiling was about 4,000 and dropping fast, until eventually it came down to the deck and it was just thick fog. Well, we got back to our station, and the first chap, he overshot 3 times because he couldn't see to land very well. We hadn't got permission to land, but things were getting so desperate that our pilot just ignored the authority and decided to get down. And one of the crew said, "You'll be court-martialed." He said, "Well, I want to live." And he came in. We could only see 2 of the perimeter lights. It was just like driving through fog. And how he got down, I don't know. We bounced down and shot up about as high as a house, and there were several other bumps, but at least we landed.
Yes. How many aircraft were lost that night then?
Well, from our squadron, we lost 8.
Yes.
And 28 of the crew were lost. Some survived. Yes. But altogether, in this country, 102 aircraft crashed.
In this country?
Yes.
And how many had you lost over enemy territory?
29 over Berlin. Yes. And all the public knew was that 29 aircraft was lost. Well, the chaps were infuriated.
Yes, of course.
I mean, gambling with lives like that. And the tension was very high, so much so that the next day they called all our crew together in a private meeting, and the station commander came in, and he said, "I sympathise with you." He said, "I know how you feel about this." But he said, "If you go and shoot your mouth off tonight," he said, "in local pubs," he said, "that's just the information the enemy is waiting to hear." And we were sworn to silence at threat of being court-martialed.
Now, your crew was nominated right from the start to join the Pathfinder group under Group Captain Cheshire VC. Now, it was on a Pathfinder mission that you actually won your DFC, and you won it literally on a wing and a prayer. Tell us about that, Tom.
That's right. It was our 7th trip. We'd been to Berlin. We were on the way back when we were attacked by a fighter. All we knew was there was a blood-curdling scream, and the whole of the aircraft shuddered, and there was a smell of gunpowder, and then I noticed, I thought the pilot had been hit, and I'd received some flying instruction just to fly it steady, so I pulled back the blackout curtain, but I saw him struggling with the controls, so I knew he was all right. But I noticed then that the starboard outer engine was on fire. Now, all the tanks are filled with petrol, and the rule is that if a fire cannot be extinguished within 1 minute, the danger is there of the tanks blowing up.
So
to
you
bail
went
out.
for the extinguisher.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, of course, the flight engineer tried to operate the fire extinguisher, but that had all been shot away. And we used to wear parachute harness with just 2 hooks and that, and we always had a parachute near us. Well, I just remember feeling down to the side of the navigation table from a parachute, not feeling very happy, and I could see this fire still burning, and we'd been, the tail unit had been damaged, and the aircraft was doing a gentle spiral. Actually, we dropped from 17,000 feet to 9,000 feet before the pilot could arrest it.
Where had the scream come from then?
That was the tail gunner. He'd seen the orange flashes of the cannons of the fighter, and actually a cannon shell went clean between his legs, injured one leg, and another cannon shell came up the aircraft and went out just above my head. There was a distinct hole, and some of it must have caught the starboard outer as well. The aircraft was slightly tilted at the time, and of course I thought, well, if that fire doesn't go out, well, normally the rush of air tends to encourage the fire, it doesn't extinguish it. And if ever on times like that, that's when the reality of God comes to you, because there's no time to kneel down and put your hands together in a pious attitude. You feel that God is there and you call on him. And if ever I prayed, I said, "Oh, Lord, put the fire out, put the fire out." And amazing, I looked and the fire went out. And it was red. And so that's how I got my medal.
Well, well.
Answer to prayer.
Tom, how many crashes were you involved in during the wartime?
Well, there were several occasions when the aircraft was damaged. We got back with just 3 engines. But there were 2 major crashes when the aircraft were right off. In fact, the trip from Berlin, when we were attacked by the fighter and we crash landed at Chichester, this is a souvenir that I have. It's part of the equipment in the bomb bay. This is suspended from the undercarriage, and the bomb fuse is attached to that. And then when you press the bomb, it's released. But we had a very nasty crash in training. It was the last cross-country flight on a Wellington bomber when we were at Operational Training Unit. We were just coming into land. We crossed the A1 motorway, which is near the airfield, and suddenly both engines packed up for lack of petrol. And the starboard wing hit a telegraph pole and trailed the wires with it. The other wing hit one of the poles supporting the DREM lights that surround the aerodrome. And we were, of course, at crash stations in the centre of the aircraft, and we went down with a bump and a thud. Then there was a final shudder, then silence. And when I got out of the aircraft, it was an amazing scene. I thought perhaps we'd just landed on the airport, but we'd stopped 2 fields short, and it was bright moonlight, and it was a cornfield. There were sheaves of corn all round us. I felt like singing a harvest hymn as thanksgiving for deliverance.
Now, Tom, after all the crashes that you experienced, your flying days actually ended rather strangely, and perhaps a bit lamely, really, because you were training these greenhorn young pilots up in the air, and suddenly something happened that made you think, oh, it isn't worth it all.
Yes, that's right. I was posted to Swinderby as a radar instructor. I used to lecture on the ground, but occasionally I went in the air to give them practical instruction. And I was flying with one crew, and when we got back to base, the pilot overshot once, twice, 3 times. He just didn't seem to be able to land the plane. And actually, he didn't get down till the 7th trip, by which time I was getting extremely anxious.
So what did you do?
Well, when I landed, I'd been having trouble with my ear, and I knew that if I reported sick, they would ground me from flying. And so I thought, well, here goes. I'm not going to risk my neck any further. And so I reported sick, and after that, I didn't fly anymore. I became Assistant Training Wing Adjutant until I was demobilised.
Tom Leak, thank you very much. Now, you may not know it, but there are only 2 Lancaster bombers left in the world that are still flying. And it'll probably be quite a while since you've seen one. It just so happens that there is a bomber not too far away from you. So if you look on the map, here.